Hi folks, you're with Tassus today. Tassus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this essay as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car or your truck, or put in those earbuds and listen to it in public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about colonialism and trade, international trade and colonialism as it was in the mercantile and the industrial, or the earlier part of the industrial age, the Industrial Revolution. Now, what we're taught at the moment in all the propaganda, and it is propaganda, make no mistake, is that colonialism was evil, straight white Nazi, fascist, Hitler, bigot, xenophobe males going around the world oppressing those poor, helpless people that were living in an idyllic lifestyle of milk and honey and beauty and wonder and so on and so forth. This, of course, bears no resemblance to any reality or any facts or truth. It's completely made up narrative. We just need to understand that. Now, when I first started doing business traveling, one of the first places I went to was a third world country. And even in third world countries, they still have people that are fantastically rich, and small areas of, out of a population of 100 million, there'll be 2 or 3 million people that are doing very nicely, thank you, and they own all the business and they've got all the monopolies and all that sort of stuff. Interestingly, the model of a small oligarchy controlling everything in these third world dirt poor countries is the sort of model that the globalists are trying to impose on the Western world at the moment, just as an interesting aside. But anyway, so I arrive at no, I haven't been to a third world country, passing through maybe as a kid, but I haven't been to a third world country as an adult before. So the airport is designed and built by Western engineers and so on, but it's got some local flavors, some of the wooden artifacts and things like that around the place tell you that you're not in the West anymore. And then as soon as you get outside of the airport, you're like, whoa. And it's, an overpopulated, very, very poor place. And that comes across. And I've got to drive out, or being driven out to a place where there's a new factory being built. And it's not far out of the city, actually. It's maybe less than half an hour's drive. And so I get out to going out to the factory, and there are farmers tilling the fields with oxen, and wooden plows. So there's a native guy there, brown guy, barefooted, walking in the fields with the oxen, with a wooden, very rudimentary wooden plow that looks like he's made it himself, and he's got the yoke around the neck of the oxen, being used to pull the plow is, and it's very inefficient, because when an oxen makes a turn, it doesn't turn, can't make a tight turn. It's quite a wide turn. So it's a very inefficient way of tilling the field, because the oxen makes a wide turn. Then there's a whole area of the field that you can't till. So you can't plant sort of crops in it. And now, if you try and come back the other way with the oxen, then you trample the seeds and the tilling that you've already done. So now in Europe, or Western Europe, when the agricultural revolution was starting to kick off, so we're talking 400 or so years ago, more. They worked out that with a redesigned yoke, and by using horses, they could increase the amount of tilled soil in the field by up to 25%. Made a big difference to, as you can imagine, to agricultural productivity, and it was all part of this wider agricultural revolution thing that was going on, planting turnips in fallow fields and so on. Now, this is so I was already walking past, or driving past, a situation that was 400 years old, and you realise, holy crap, I'm in the third world here. And a whole lot of other things that you see around you that remind you that technologically you've stepped back in time by many hundreds of years. Everything that looks Western has been typically built by Westerners, designed by them, and so on, or with imported technology. So these people are standing on the shoulders of the giants, and so on. What's even more interesting is that they are still living this way when they had colonial a colonial presence in a small part of the place, a colonial presence, and they were exposed to Western technologies such as modern plows and all this sort of stuff, and yet they're still using the oxen and these old 400-year-old handmade, wooden plows and so on. That there's actually been not much transfer of the technology is right there in front of them, but they're choosing not to use it or not be bothered with it. Or to use only small bits of it. So they'll accept the technology when it's, say, it's a ready-made motor vehicle that's being imported, and they'll drive that around. But their concept with things like maintenance and changing the oil and things like that are extremely minimal. So and hygiene. I noticed that at the back of restaurants there were, in these outrageously and horribly polluted rivers, there are people, sort of subcontract type people, that are taking the dishes from the restaurant and going out into sitting at the edge of these horribly polluted rivers, washing the dishes, and then they're going back into the restaurant. And these aren't sort of the street restaurants. These are the restaurants that people like me are eating at. So you can imagine the possibility of contracting all sorts of diseases. You go past rivers or tributaries to rivers where you see dead bodies of dogs, cats, and anything else you can imagine floating down there, and realize that that's actually going straight into the water supply that's pumped into your showers or your bath or your you're in a third world country, and yet they had, in this place, they had over 250 years of a colonial presence of one of the most advanced technological societies in the world. But for some reason, they haven't really adopted, they haven't used to their own benefit that technology and their exposure to it. So let's now look at this idea that colonialism was a bad thing, and was only ever bad, only did bad things, and it was exploitation. It was this doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Now, I guess when the first people arrived in parts of, first white people arrived in parts of Africa, and or even the Arabs when they came to sub-Saharan Africa and other places like Australia and so on, they were dealing with or meeting a Stone Age people where something in the order of 10,000 years of evolution separated the two societies. And what does anyone think is going to happen there? 10,000 years separating. Would you not think you were the superior people if you were 10,000 years more advanced? Now, even if the ancient Athenians or ancient Egyptians had come to Australia, these are the ancient Egyptians capable of building the pyramids and some serious engineering feats. Even if they'd come to Australia, that they would have perceived themselves as being thousands of years ahead of the Australian Aborigine in terms of technological development. Once you get technological development, and it's hard to know what exactly might come first, but once you get technological development, you then start to have people clustering in population centres. And once you have that, you then see development of administrative and legal and organisational structures to deal with so many people being in one place. It could be, well, we don't want the peasants rioting, so we better make sure we have food coming in. So the canals become navigable. There's good quality roads, all weather, all season roads for bringing food in from the farms around the cities. And there's all sorts of things get developed. There's other people down the way there who want to rip off the stuff that you've spent a lot of time building. So you have to develop some sort of military force capable of seeing the baddies off, and that sort of stuff. So a whole lot of things come from it, and so when you have Stone Age societies meeting advanced societies, particularly as the Europeans developed long ocean-going vessels, then and they could get to the Americas, could get to Australia, New Zealand, and the like. Then you had a very advanced technological society. They had to be advanced, otherwise they couldn't have made those journeys. Meeting a society that isn't technologically advanced, or organisationally advanced, or administratively advanced, because they've had none of the inputs, none of the requirements, none of the natural organic pressures that occur once in advance. For example, you look at the ancient Assyrians, so we're going back thousands of years now into what today would be, modern day Iraq, Iran, sort of around there. And they developed irrigation canals, things like that. And to around those, the Tigris and Euphrates and those sort of rivers, to develop large scale, almost industrial scale, you could call it agriculture. Because of that, they then could look after vast herds of animals, could grow a lot of crops. A lot of people therefore moved there. When you've got that much food all year round, people procreate more. Because they're well fed and healthy, then there's less infant mortality and less disease and so on and so forth. So before you know it, you're building cities and creating large population centres, which then require the aforementioned administrative legal structures and the like. So now, if you look at, say, a place like Australia, there were at the very high end in the whole of Australia, which is a big continent. I mean, it's approximately the size of the United States, not including Alaska. Then there were somewhere between 250,000 and 1 million natives in Australia at the time, in the whole continent. So travellers and explorers and pioneers could literally travel for days and not see a single person. It's not like there were big cities everywhere and the white folks came along and took it over. Now, when we look at, say, sub-Saharan Africa, the Arabic peoples were developing, for example, they'd gone beyond the Bronze Age and they were smelting iron at around between 800 and 900 BC. They introduced this technology, the Arabs, and the sub-Saharan black people saw this technology before, on or about that time. So, when the British came into, say, South Africa and in West Africa, going around, they found that the natives were still using stone. Even the Zulus were using a very rudimentary form of smelting for the iron-tipped spears that would have been considered entry-level technology in 900 BC, and yet here we are in the late 1800s. The Zulus are using effectively technology that's 3,000 years old. So this is an illustration to how little of the technology, even when they're exposed to it, they took up. Now, in terms of colonialism, we need to understand there were two stages to colonialism. The first was the mercantile age. It was trade. It wasn't really colonialism. I mean, you could argue that when the first Europeans started coming to North America, they found that they could again go for weeks without seeing a single native. So the idea that it was occupied land or populated land isn't something that it crossed their mind. Similarly, the Indians in North America, or indeed the Aborigines in Australia, would tend to move around based on the seasons. And sometimes they would be gone for years before they would come back into an area. So again, from a European concept of land ownership, this land is unused. They're not doing anything with it. They're not using the land to grow crops or to run herds of animals, or they're not doing anything with it. So it's therefore common land, and we can occupy it. And we're happy to buy it, though. Here's some iron axes, which would have been super advanced technology to these people at the time, whether it be in Africa or so. We'll give you these iron axes. Again, super advanced technology as far as and we'll give you these iron axes, but we own this land now. We've bought it. So the mere concept of purchasing land, of land ownership, of contract, of legally honouring a contract, it's just something that was completely foreign to these people. They hadn't developed that far. They were still living in a society that was 10,000 years old. If you'd gone back 10,000 years in time into Western Europe, they'd have had no concept of that either. Nobody did. These were things that were developed in advanced technological societies. So in the case of in Australia, in North America too, the land we purchased by the white people, they'd invest time and money in cultivating crops and making fences to keep the animals, all that sort of stuff. And then the local native inhabitants would come back a few years later and, oh, no, we want this land now. We want to tell, gee, you've got to, wow, that looks good. That looks juicy. I want to have some of that. So I'll take that back now. It's on land. So why don't you get off it? And that's how they would deal with other tribes in their, in North America or Australia. They would just threaten you. And if you didn't like it, they'd throw a few spears at you, that type of stuff. But this was something that the white people would go, no, I've purchased this. I gave you those 10 iron axes. But because the iron axis had since worn out, or the handles had broken, or whatever it was, rusted or something, then I don't care. We want it back now. So what? We signed a contract. We don't understand what that means. And if you don't move, we'll kill you. Oh yeah, well you try and kill us, we'll kill you. And you can see how it would have all. But this doesn't mean that anybody was evil or planned evil or plotted evil or thought in evil terms. It doesn't mean that at all. You've got one society that's 10,000 years ahead in technological, organizational, and otherwise development than the society that they've just arrived in. And again, if it hadn't been for development of long ocean-going vessels and technology, then it probably would never have happened. But is it a bad thing? Was it a bad thing? There were unfortunate consequences, such as uniquely, because they were almost hermetically sealed off from one another. European diseases, for example, smallpox, that sort of thing. That had a big effect on some of these native peoples, and understandably so. Many of the Caribbean islanders, North American Indians were affected by these diseases and died until they began to acquire immunity. Now, on the issue of were these native peoples living idyllic existences, we have to understand that in Australia, for example, that the average life expectancy was between 20 and 25. Infant mortality, was around 50%. So this is this something that we can say, wow, these people were having a great time. Look, they were dead by 25 and infant mortality was 50%. Wow, what a tremendous lifestyle these guys had. Starvation was regular. Because they didn't cultivate crops and animals and so on, the entire continent of Australia could only support less than 1 million people. Again, the most optimistic projections were 1 million people. So in spite of having millions of acres of arable land, in spite of that, these people were still Stone Age hunter-gatherers and hadn't developed beyond that. And they'd been stuck in that stage for over 20,000 years. Now, there's another sort of argument that comes up. Well, yeah, but they were so happy and everything was peaceful and wonderful. No, it wasn't. The tribes were busily killing each other and intertribal, they were killing each other over women. And there was, as soon as young girls would menstruate, they were passed around to be as sexual partners for the older men. All this sort of stuff was going on, and very brutal. And even the early white people who would come from brutal societies where folks were getting hung and beheaded and so on, they asserted, the early early white folks coming to Australia, they were astonished at how brutal the Aborigines were to each other. They just couldn't understand it, and thought it was beyond the pale. And again, these are people coming from a brutal society, or what was fairly brutal at the time. So, this idea that these people were living idyllic lifestyles and it was cruelly interrupted by the white folks is a complete lie. I mean, it's an absolute and total lie. And the average age of Aboriginal Australians now is close to 3 times what it was when the white folks turned up. So the introduction of white medicine, white technology, white organisation, white agriculture, white manufacturing, transport, you name it, in every conceivable way, the white people brought that technology with them. And in the places where they stayed, such as Australia, then everybody benefits from that. This is not something that only the white people benefit from. Everybody can use the roads. Everybody can use everyone can go to the grocery store and buy the food and so on and so forth. So we need to look at the steps that colonialism took. And initially, it was just trade. The cost and the aggravation and the organization or the levels of organization that involved setting up anything beyond a trading colony or a trading station or a port, a small area of land where we'll just use this as the place where we buy and sell the stuff. So initially it was just trade, but typically, given the natives would always renege on deals, and various warlords would try and exploit the situation. If I can make a buck out of this, I'll just close all the roads so those white folks can't get their spices onto the ship. Then what began as trade developed into a colonial presence, and we need a certain degree of control here. Otherwise, we can't reliably get our produce or whatever they're buying to the ships. So, given the cost of sending 10 ships out there, cargo ships to get the stuff, given the cost was so high and the risks so high, weather and storms and so on, then they needed reliable access to the products they'd already paid for. So that would result in all sorts of altercations, and then the colonial presence would extend and increase. This is today painted as just a desire by evil racist Whitey to oppress brown peoples. I can see no evidence of that anywhere. You could look at place like Belgium's presence in Africa, where the desire was to extract mineral wealth, and if that could have been done reliably without various black tribes trying to kill folks, that would have passed off peacefully. It wouldn't nothing would have happened. Certainly into the 1950s, communist Marxist agitators were running around stirring up trouble and trying to get black mobs to engage in mass unrest and so on. But that aside, if the colonial Belgium in this case, but others, you can say French colonies and so on, if the idea was that the colonial presence was to keep the peace while the mining or the agriculture or whatever it was pursued. Now, it didn't mean the locals didn't benefit and have all those industries in their tribal regions and so on. They did, of course, they benefited. I mean, was the primary beneficiary the Europeans? Well, yeah, it was their idea, their technology, their discovery. They were paying for the roads, they were paying for the ports, they were paying for the transport. Sure, it was. You would expect them to have a larger degree of benefit because they had a larger cost and investment and in putting infrastructure in place that would happen. But this wasn't, again, a case of white people oppressing black or brown people. I don't think it was ever that. I can't find any evidence of that. And maybe somebody can, and maybe can point it out. Did things get unpleasant from time to time? Well, they did, and there were events that both sides would probably regret, and if they had the time over again, they probably wouldn't do it again. did local officials, when they're surrounded by hostile tribes and there are already numerous murders around, and did they panic and get the army out too quickly or too early and too vigorously? Sure, those things happened, and there's no question of that. But that doesn't mean it was done in some environment of complete peace and harmony where innocent people were just being mowed down for no reason by crazed racist white people. It was never like that. And so we really need to accept that in all the Stone Age and remember what white people, particularly when in the scientific age, white people were the most advanced technologically by either hundreds or thousands of years, and they brought all that advanced technology with them, and they gave it and left it there with all these Stone Age peoples, or colonized a very, very sparsely populated land, as was the case with North America or Australia. So this completely changed the lives of the people involved. I think if you asked anybody from any of these places, do you want to fully return to the lifestyle that you had before the white people showed up? Well, yeah, I want to do that, but I want to keep my mobile phone, and I want to have my cable television. I want to have no. Totally back to nobody would take that. Nobody would accept that challenge. And if they did, in some crazed moment, they would last a week or two, and they'd be straight back in. I want my mobile phone back. So nobody would return to that. And I think that's probably one of the big tests. Was they complain about it, or the activists put them up to complaining about it, the reality is they would never go back to the way it was. So white people, with their advanced science, medicine, engineering, all that sort of stuff, they brought they jumped these societies forward by 10,000 years in terms of access to the technology. Now, there are still third world countries around. They were basket case countries when the white folks turned up, and they're basket case places today. And that's got more to do with the people there that are incapable of administering anything other than a complete failed state. And that's something we could look at and deal with there. But the idea, was colonialism a bad thing, and did it only do bad? No, that's complete nonsense. It's an utter lie. Were white people uniquely evil and enslavers? But no, that was never the case. So I think we need to really start looking at this from a point of view of facts and reality. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.